Hello students. Thank you for allowing me to do a video lecture for our first chapter due to all the changes that we had to make. Alright, so before I begin, I wanted you to know that I'm not going to answer every single question that's in the handout. Some of those items are placed there for you to do on your own, and then on the next meeting before we start the next chapter, I would actually take the opportunity to go through, give you a chance to ask any questions. There are some questions in the packet that are there for us to go over on our next meeting, and I'll address that as we get to those. Anatomy doesn't have a specific definition. It has two complementary branches of science, anatomy and physiology. Anatomy studies the structure of the body parts and their relationships to one another, whereas physiology studies the internal and external structure, more so how they function. Anatomy is a broad field with many subdivisions. Some of the subdivisions we're going to look at for anatomy are gross or macroscopic. This is the study of large body structures visible with the naked eye. There are some subdivisions of gross or macroscopic. Examples would be regional, which is the study of structures in a particular region. Sorry about that. Some examples of regional anatomy would be muscles, bones, blood vessels, and nerves. Another subdivision of gross anatomy would be systemic. The body structure is studied system by system in the systemic anatomy course. When cardiovascular system is studied, for example, you would examine the heart and the blood vessels of the entire body. If you're looking at the division of surface anatomy, this is when we would study internal structures as they relate to the overlying skin surface, the portion of the body that would be superficial. This is used when we locate blood vessels to draw blood or identifying bulging muscles beneath the skin. Another subdivision would be microscopic anatomy. On your slide, you have cytology and histology listed. Cytology is the study of cells, and histology is the study of tissue. In Chapter 4, you'll actually spend time going through the various types of tissues and how each particular type plays a role in the body. And then the last subdivision that's mentioned in the slide is embryology. Embryology is the study of development of an embryo from the stage of the ovum or fertilization through the fetal stage. We won't get an opportunity to go into this detail. That's going to be a part of your AP2. Physiology is the study of the function of the body. Basically, the study of how life-sustaining activities are carried out, how organisms perform, or how they function. Subdivisions based on organ systems. Renal or cardiovascular physiology would be an example of that. Often, physiology is going to focus on cellular or molecular level of those systems. The body's abilities depend on chemical reactions in individual cells. Okay. All right, with the principle of complementarity, this is something that you need to make sure that you're familiar with. You will be asked a question in some form about this on your test. The slide states that anatomy and physiology are inseparable. And what they mean by that is that what a structure can do depends on its specific form, meaning that you really can't have one without the other. They have to be studied together in order to understand the structure and how that particular structure works. You will need to know the levels of organization from the most complex to the least complex. Also know them from the least complex to the most complex. Excuse me. You may be asked a question on your exam for you to put them in a specific order, and I don't know which order you would be asked. All right. Chemical would include atoms, molecules, and organelles. In chapters 2 and 3, we'll speak about those a little bit more in detail. Those atoms, molecules, and organelles come together and they will form cells, which will be your next level. We'll go into more detail about those in chapter 3. A group of similar cells will form a tissue. A group of 2 or more tissue types will form an organ. Organ systems are going to be organs that are working close together. Usually 2 or more would be in that organ system. And the organism, which would be us, would be all organ systems working together. All right, looking at this diagram, again, we're letting you know that the chemical level is a combination of both the atoms that combine to form the various molecules. Those atoms and molecules will then come together and form an organelle. The example that's given is a smooth muscle cell. Next, a group of those muscle cells would come together and form a smooth muscle tissue. A blood vessel, which is also an organ, would be formed by groups of similar tissue cells that are coming together for that organ's function. And finally, next we have our organ system level, which would be various organs working together. In the diagram that gave you the cardiovascular system, along with the heart and blood vessels. And then all of these systems will come together to form us. Necessary life functions are important. However, due to the restriction of time on this, I'm going to allow you to read that. And then when we meet on Tuesday, we can go into more detail if you have any questions. Let's see what was after that. Sorry, I'm just going along with the handout that I provided. All right, on page 3, question number 8, it asks that you list the body systems and state the functions of these systems and the organs that are in them. This is one of those parts that we're not going to go through together. I feel as though if you spend the time and do it yourself, you'll retain the information more. This information will be used both in lab and in lecture. Also with the questions that fall at the end of that chart. Take the opportunity once you've completed that chart to see if you're able to answer those questions. We'll actually go through and look at the answers in class. All right, so I skipped to the next part that I am going to go over, which is homeostasis. Homeostasis, and this is the textbook definition that you'll probably see again, which is why I'm going to provide you with that, is maintenance of relatively stable internal conditions despite continuous changes in the environment. All right, so what do they mean by that? Well, looking at the next bullet, a dynamic state of equilibrium is what it really means. And that means balance. This is the state when the body's needs are met and it's functioning smoothly. Homeostasis is complicated. Basically, you want to maintain contributions of all organ systems. Everybody's working correctly. Your temperature is great. All body systems are working as they should. Homeostatic control mechanisms basically involves a continuous monitoring and regulation system. All factors that can change affect the body, a disease, a virus, anything that can modify homeostasis is going to be controlled by a homeostatic control mechanism. And all homeostatic control mechanisms have at least 3 interdependent components that regulate the various variables that are being monitored. The primary organ systems that regulate homeostasis is going to be the nervous and the endocrine system. Nervous and endocrine systems accomplish this through communication between each other via impulses and hormones. I just mentioned that all homeostatic control mechanisms have at least 3 interdependent components. Those components are a receptor, a control center, and an effector. The receptor being first is where your sensory organs or your sensory receptors are going to be. They're going to monitor the environment, and they're going to travel up the afferent pathway. So once they receive whatever that change or that stimulus is, it's going to deliver it to the control center, and it's going to go on the afferent pathway. That's AFFERENT, which means toward. Once the control center receives it, it's going to determine which variables have been changed and what they need to do to maintain those. It's going to submit an appropriate response, and it's going to send it on the efferent pathway, which is EFFERENT, which is going to be away. So afferent will be toward the control center. Efferent, which is with the E, is going to be away from the control center. So once it receives it and makes that determination, it's going to send it to those organs or to those nerves or to those glands, whatever portion that has been affected, and they want to correct that response. It's going to send it to the effectors. It'll be received in one of 2 ways. It's going to be a response that reduces, which would be a negative feedback, or it's going to be a response that enhances, which is going to be a positive feedback. And we'll briefly look at that. All right, so here's a diagram that you also need to be familiar with. During my lecture exams, I like to do diagrams because I'm a visual learner, but use them as a means to study and think about them during your comprehensive final. There are absolutely no pictures or diagrams that are going to be on that test. It is completely multiple choice. So I'll do my best to incorporate more multiple choice questions in the exams that are coming up, but I do like to use visuals because it's just a similar style in how I learn. All right, so looking at this diagram, remember I mentioned the first part is going to be the receptor. With the receptor, we're going to say that a stimulus has been produced. It's going to be detected by those receptors. It is going to travel to the control center on the afferent pathway, which is with the A. And then once the control center receives that stimulus and determines, oh, this is what I need to do to fix this problem, it's going to send it on the efferent pathway, which is with the E. I'm Southern, so sometimes those sound alike. That output is going to be sent to our effectors, organs, glands, muscles, whatever the case may be. And then it will do either a negative feedback, which would be to reduce that particular action, or it's going to do a positive feedback in order to enhance it. All right, speaking of negative feedbacks, most of the mechanisms in the body are going to be negative feedbacks.